Behind every survivor's smile is pain perhaps you'll never get to see. Hi, I'm Sharon Landon, and welcome back to this episode of Old Asian Lady. My guest today is Tom Landon, my brother. In part 2 of Tom's journey, we dive into the hardest chapter of his life, battling leukemia. From painful bone marrow biopsies and spinal taps to the emotional toll of guilt, anger, and depression. Tom shares the raw truth of living through serious illness. This episode explores the role of family and faith and the transformation that comes when you move from despair to gratitude. Tom's story is a reminder that even in the darkest times, support and hope can carry us through. Just a quick reminder, if you like our stories, please like, share, and subscribe. We really appreciate your support.
You said you were in the hospital for 3 to 4 weeks.
Right.
And then after that, it was done, or you went back home?
Oh, no. I was on chemo for another 2 weeks. Another 2 years.
Years, okay.
I was on chemotherapy for another 2 years. I was in and out of the hospital because leukemia is basically you're immunosuppressed. You don't have any kind of you're not fighting any infection. So I was if I spiked a fever, I was in the hospital. So I'd be in the hospital overnight. I would go, I can remember one time, and it would be even when I was an outpatient, I'd be coming into the hospital for chemotherapy. I started later. I was going to the doctor's office itself for chemotherapy, and we actually had a routine. Even after I went back to work, I was off work for 4 months. When I was finally healthy enough to go to work, I still wasn't physically strong enough to do a lot of things. I had difficulty doing common everyday tasks. At one point, somebody asked me to open a bottle of rubbing alcohol. I couldn't do it. I couldn't open a bottle of rubbing alcohol. I had to have somebody else help me with it. I could, you spend a lot of time wearing gloves in hospitals. I couldn't put gloves on by myself. I wasn't strong enough to do it. But people would help me do that kind of stuff. But it was just, we just got through it,
Yeah, I think getting through it is, I guess, what a lot of people have to do in terms of when there's something like this that happens in their life. What was the hardest thing about this period of time? It's over 2 years, right? But
well, it became more and more normal. As I got healthier, it became easier to deal with. One of the things that they did also was, as part of the diagnostic process, is they do a thing called a bone marrow biopsy. And basically what they do is they take bone marrow from the crest of your pelvis and back. And that requires a lot. That's a lot of pain. They did that for 2 years during the whole time.
wow.
They also did what they called lumbar punctures. They did spinal taps. It was traumatic. Part of it was just because I'm so big, and some of they were having difficulties doing that, and they ended up having to do it. They ended up having to do it in fluoroscopy. Fluoroscopy is like a moving radar, moving X-ray. Okay. So they can actually see what they're doing, but it's an x-ray. So at one point they actually lost the needle in my I mean, like they were sticking the needle in and they couldn't tell whether they had it in my spine or not. And so they had to stop it. They had to transfer me onto a stretcher and take me down to fluoroscopy. Okay. That's when that started. And they had to see find out where the needle was so they could finish the lumbar puncture. And then but my oncologist at that point, he says, okay, from now on, Mr. Landon, he gets all of his lumbar punctures in fluoroscopy, and he gets them with as much Demerol as he wants.
I know. I'm like,
yeah.
oh.
Yeah. So I got all the painkiller I wanted. And I mean, not like I got addicted to it or anything, but they use painkillers and they use fluoroscopy to really make sure they were doing what, they were where they needed to be. So.
So I guess, I mean, pain was a big, huge part of this process, but it's like, did you ever have any time where you just thought, you know what, I just can't do it. I don't want to do this anymore. Or
no, I never felt like that. It was always, I mean, I had Bern and I had the kids. And I mean, and the worst part about it was like, I knew at that point how much I was traumatizing them. You know what I mean? It became more and more apparent the further along we went, but I think it was harder on them in a lot of respects than it was on me, because they were just watching it. And the kids will tell you today, I mean, now they're both in their 30s. They're both today, they say they don't remember that time. They just remember me being bald. They don't remember, me being sick. But I know that it affected Joe really bad. Bern said that when I wasn't there, he would run through the house. Where's daddy? Where's daddy? I know that it affected dad. He was really upset. When I called the house, and he was the one who answered the phone, and I told him that I had leukemia. And again, I could hear in his voice, how much it hurt him, and I didn't want to do that. But and at that point I almost felt like I was letting him down. You know what I mean? It was kind of, that was the feeling that I had. I failed you somehow. But he was just like, Mom, years later, Mom said he was so upset by that. He was so, traumatized himself by that. He was so hurt that I was sick.
But what's the reason for that he was so deeply affected?
As a kid, I'm his child.
Okay.
I was sick. I always joke. Now, I mean, one of the things that I always felt like was able to get through that was my sense of humor. I always felt, because I always felt like, I tell people, you're always like 9 years old in your mom's eyes, but I said at that point I turned into 3. I was a 3-year-old in her eyes after that. She just wanted to she just wanted to pick me up and hold me and cuddle me and, keep me safe. It affected both of them. I know that.
So, you said you felt guilty because of that? I mean,
well, yeah, because I felt like I was letting them down.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain. It's just like one of those things. It's like, I at one point, Bern dropped me off at the hospital for an infusion. Like I had to have some chemo or something like that. I went to the place where I was, but I was spiking a fever at that point. That day I had a fever of 107 as I walked into the hospital. I mean, I was sick. I was really sick. And I barely made it into the office where I was supposed to be. And when I got there, they took one look at me and they said, "We're admitting you." And I said, "Well, I need to let Bern know." And I really felt like when I was talking to her on the phone, that I was letting her down. You know what I mean? I was failing her somehow. And it's just hard to explain that feeling.
Sometimes it's men more so than women in terms of they feel that they have to be responsible, the responsible person. I mean, I'm not saying that, the women aren't, but the fact that we were brought up to be really responsible people, in terms of
Yeah.
worth ethics, just the way we treat people and however like that. So I guess that, must have come into that guilt feeling that you're not doing what you should be doing, which is taking care of your family or taking care of your kids, your wife. I don't know.
Yeah.
Uh, so right now, is a leukemia still in your system? Are you all cleared or?
Well, it does things to you that like never that forever change you. I mean, I don't you've seen I have that divot in my head right there from the surgery. They actually at one point my doctor was like, "Well, we're going to stop doing lumbar punctures on Mr. Landon. We're going to put this port in his head, and we're going to use that to do the diagnosis and put chemo in that we need to, for that specific thing." And they used that instead. Um, it didn't hurt going in. It hurt when they took it out. It was like I always tell people it was like they took me out into the driveway and they ran a truck over my head a couple times.
Oh my gosh.
That was the worst headache I ever had in my life. And it was the only time I've ever had morphine was to relieve that pain. And it really and I tell people it didn't really do anything for the pain. You just really don't care anymore when you have that much morphine in your system.
But I don't. So the treatments that you got for that, is it a normal treatment for
Yes.
chemo?
Well, it was what they did 30 years ago. I don't know what it is now. And the other thing about that is that there's different types of leukemia. There's different kinds of blood cancers. And I just had the one that I had was the one that you're most likely to survive. It was it's what they were saying was it's fast moving, but if we catch it in time, it's the one that you are most likely to survive. When they sat me down for the conference on the diagnosis, he said, "We got it early enough. It will take, you have a 95% chance of survival at that point." He said, the only thing that it did was it changed things for me. I can never donate blood. I can't donate my organs when I die. Because that it was a blood cancer. So there's always going to be remnants of that in me. And there's just too much of a risk that I would pass that to somebody else. They tell you that you're never really cured from leukemia. It's like you're always in remission. So like I could conceivably have a relapse, but the chances are minuscule that it will happen. But they did radiation therapy on me. At that point, they told me you probably should not get too many more x-rays in your life. I shouldn't go out and spend too much time in the sun. Even now, I'm very cautious about getting any x-rays and things like that. It's only for absolutely necessary purposes.
Right.
When the doctor says, "Well, I want you to have a CT scan," or, "Well, I want you to have an x-ray for something," I always say, is this really necessary? We always want to caution them. I mean, those are the two big ones.
They, when they did the thing in your head that was so painful and stuff, did that do any, does that do any damage?
Well, the doctor, well, okay. So that you have fluid in your spinal cord, and it runs in your brain, actually floats in that fluid. that's what they were looking for. But you have a hollow spot in the middle of your brain called a ventricle, and that's what they did was they put a tube down into that, okay, so that they could like check it for because leukemia will settle in that fluid. Okay.
Oh.
So that's what they did. They were checked at it, but they would also put in chemotherapy drugs at that, or at that time. So what they would do is they balance that off. A lot of people, when they have a spinal tap or something like that, will get a huge, awful headache because they've removed fluid, but they haven't replaced it with anything. Well, when they took that tube out, when they removed it, that's what caused the headache.
Oh.
Because that was like the worst headache I've ever had in my life.
Oh, I mean, I'm really lucky because I very, very, very rarely ever have headaches.
I don't want to say get used to the pain, but you don't. You learn to appreciate, I think, things more because of that. Like I said, the spinal tap that stuff stopped after a while.
Mhm.
As that was that they put that in when I was an outpatient, so that I could get the chemo. When they still had to do the bone marrow biopsies. They did that all through the whole 2 years.
Mhm.
Okay, checking my bone marrow to make sure that there wasn't any more leukemia cancer in there. That is, like I said, that's incredibly painful. And I would have to prepare for that by taking Percocets beforehand, so that I would go to the doctor's office and be kind of ready for him to like numb me up so that it wouldn't hurt that much. Yeah, it was a lot of pain,
Oh, ah, I just don't know how you handled it or dealt with it. I mean,
it,
anyway, yeah.
it, it got I won't say it ever got easy, but I will say that it made me more appreciative, I think, of the little pains in my life, made me, like, well, that's just minor compared to, you know,
Like, oh, a scratch. What is that? No.
uh, broken bone. It's nothing. But,
Yeah.
it really did kind of put it in perspective.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. People have different perspectives about a lot of different things. And oftentimes, until they go through that situation themselves, they have no idea. They have
Yeah.
no idea. Yeah. Aside from, I guess, feeling that, other little pains are nothing, has it changed your thinking any other way in terms of your life or your identity or who you are?
I have friends that have cancer, have terminal cancer that I know of. And it just makes me more appreciative of them. It
Mhm.
makes me more emphatic, I think. I know how you feel. I know what it's like, even though my cancer might not be what theirs is, because
Mhm.
with the blood cancer, you never have like a tumor,
Yeah.
you never have it's never anything like that. It's always it's something different. These people, they might have a growth or something like that they're gonna have to have removed, and their pain is different, but it's
Mhm.
still they're going through pain, and
Mhm.
I can relate to the pain. So
So do you do you know counseling or helping in that way?
I did some. I went through a lot. I went through a lot emotionally, I think, after that. I had a really hard time. I think I was very angry for a long time after that. I really, I
Where was
that
the anger? Where did it come from? It was
uh,
coming from your guilt because you felt guilty.
um, I don't know. It just was like there's always whenever there's, of course, I studied psychology, so I know a lot about that from the outside. But whenever you have a catastrophic illness or catastrophic medical emergency or anything like that, survivors always have a lot of depression that goes with it. And there was a lot of depression that came after that. And I was very depressed, and I think that the anger came from the depression.
Mm.
It was just like, why was I spared when other people because there were other patients in the hospital that I got to know when I was there that had it, that died, and I didn't. People that I was there with, and that one guy was like, I was playing golf this morning and here I am. My doctor told me I needed to come. Same thing with me. And I was on my way to work and the doctor said, oh no, you need to go to the hospital. That's, it's like, it's so disruptive to your life. And then all of a sudden you're out the other side and there's nothing, and so you're left to introspect. And here I am looking at this and dwelling on it. And I needed to do more than anything was just stop dwelling on it. But I had a lot of anger and I lashed out a lot. I mean, not physically. I didn't physically abuse anyone or harm anyone, but I yelled a lot. And I just really needed to get a hold of that. And really, like, these people didn't have anything to do with that, and they're here to support me, and I need to stop hurting them. And so I just kind of like had to step back from that.
At this point in your life, then all of that is just, things that are in the past. Where is your, mental thinking or your about this whole
Well,
situation?
again, it's one of those things where I really feel like God delivered me. He brought me through it. It was one of those things where they didn't need to do the blood work, but they did the blood work anyway. And so that's what caught it,
Yes.
But for the grace of God, I could have bled to death on somebody's operating table.
Yeah.
I could have gotten a life-threatening illness. I could have gotten a life-threatening infection from that. Because it affects your ability to fight infection. These, I just have to remember those things and be very thankful for them. I had the support of our church at that time. I had the support of my family. And I needed to stop. I needed to be thankful and grateful to those people instead of, and approach it in that respect. I needed to take care of those people the way they took care of me.
Yeah, it's like a total change of mindset, and when you have that mindset from depression, anger to, gratitude and hope or whatever is like that, it makes a big difference in people's lives, I think, and the lives of people around them.
Yeah.
I always say there's like a emotional timeline, when you're at the negative part, where one of the worst thing is when people don't have hope at all. Hope, depression, anger, there's all these different emotional points. And when you're there, as long as you're able to gradually move up, whether it's, anger from depression, because depression, you're just there. Anger is getting something, emotion out there, and gradually getting to that point. It's always look for that path to get to the joyful part. And the positive emotion of it. And you mentioned a lot about the support that you had from Bern.
I can't be any more grateful for her in my life. The kids, she took care of them. She took care of me. She took care of me during that time. There were times she said it was kind of funny because there was the stomach flu was going around about the same time. And she's like, it was like all I was doing was cleaning clothes from all the barf.
Oh.
Everybody had it, I would be throwing up from the chemo. The kids would be throwing up because they were sick. You know, yeah. Well, that's what it was like. It was really, I mean, I spent a lot of, I mean, I can remember the first time the mom and dad came to visit, and we were all sitting down to eat, and I was like, "Excuse me." I got up from the table. I went into the bathroom, they loudly and everything like that. I came back and sat down and just started eating again, like nothing happened. And Dad was just like, "But, but what are you gonna do?" I mean, you know, that's what it was like. It was a reality, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
she
don't
took,
know.
yeah, for that time when I was so sick. I mean, really sick. I couldn't move. And Vern, it was the summer, so she took the kids to the pool every day. She got them out of the house, you know, so I could be home and be sick by myself.
Mhm.
And that was, you know, she did what she could, and then you know, she got a really great job after that. So she worked in sales for years after that, and really
Yeah.
she was the primary breadwinner. She made more money than I ever did. And
Mhm.
I always tell people that she was the one who made the money. I was the one that carried the insurance. You know?
You guys have been married now for 37 years.
Yes.
37 years is a long time. And I think was it was it kind of like love at first sight or something with her?
Yes, it was. It was. Actually, it's kind of funny because I've always said that's another thing that I felt like God moved into my life.
Mm.
I was if I had gone into the military, I would have gone to DLI. I would have gone to
Mhm.
the Language Institute in Monterey. Um, but I lost that opportunity. Jonathan went instead.
Mhm.
Um, Bernadette was his wife's roommate there, and so
Mhm.
they were friends. And I was Jonathan's third string pick for best man. You know, yeah. And Bern was the second string for maid of honor. They had other people lined up, but they weren't able to do it, so they picked us instead. And so, but we met. We had met before because Bernadette had friends in Sacramento, so they would come up to Sacramento from time to time. And that time one time they brought Bern. I was working at the gas station, and she of course it's a long trip. It's like 4 hours from Monterey to Sacramento. So she was sleeping in the back. Okay, so and when they got to the gas station, I was at a crush. I was running around the gas station trying to help people, and they pull in and they pulled Bern out of the back of the car. So she's still waking up. She's like, you know, like blinking the snot out of her eyes and wiping the spit off the side of her mouth and stuff. And they say, "This is Bern. We've told you about her. She's weird like you." And then I'm like, "Oh, hi." And she gets back in the car and they drive away. And I'm like, okay. So like then 2 years later, when they got married, that's when I really met her. And
Oh.
that's when we hit it off. We both really liked each other at the first. I was goofing off and being a real clown at the church. Um, Drove the pastor nuts. She hated it. But but again, we had a great time. I was the one who really volunteered to take her back to where she was staying. I
Mhm.
jumped in the way. Me, I'll do it. So we went to a sports bar, and we sat and talked. We had a couple of beers, we had some French fries, and we sat and talked the whole time. And then we finally like decided we'd go to her to where she was staying. And when we got there, the TV was on, and I made a late because White Christmas was on because it was right in December. So I made a lame excuse that I really wanted to sit and watch White Christmas. So I stayed. We stayed and watched the movie. We heckled it mercilessly together. We both laughed through it. And then and then I finally went home. Um, I always tell people we had more fun at John and Becky's wedding than John and Becky did. We just had a blast. We laughed the whole time. And that's when we finally kissed, was at their reception.
Mm.
And then she says, and then she had to get into her car and drive back to Pittsburgh so that she could be back in Pittsburgh for Christmas.
Mhm.
So she says, "What am I doing? I'm going 2,000 miles in the wrong direction." And but she finally moved out in June the next year in 1987, and it's been magic ever since.
Wow. So, from the time that you guys, well, the in the car doesn't count, but from the time you guys started actually interacting, to when you guys get married, how long was that?
Well, that was low. That was about 6 months, because she came out. She was out there the 1st of June in 1987. They got married at the end of December, like December 22nd, and 1986. So that was about 6 months, and like I said, we've been inseparable ever since. Haven't looked back. We got married in July of '88, so we dated for a year. I mean, and it was really funny, because when we were at the sports bar, we'd sit and talk. We'd finish each other's sentences. He would laugh at the same jokes. We just had a really good time, and it was really, it just we've always been like that. We both have a really great sense of humor. We both laugh at everything. Not obviously not cruelly, but we laugh at the same jokes. We like to watch the same type of schlocky movies. We watch goofy movies together, and it just so we really do enjoy each other.
Well, it seems like, they always have the thing where they say people opposites attract, but it seems like you guys are similar in so many different ways. Is there something that you guys have that are totally opposite of each
Um,
other?
no, I watched Game of Thrones. I don't think she ever had any interest in anything like that. We um she liked watching the Waltons. I never really had any interest in that. Like
Billy Joe or John Boy or something?
yeah, I never really got into the Waltons that much.
Yeah.
But she that there are some things that are different, but it's nothing that we could, oh, I
Yeah.
hate that. You should never watch that. Ugh. But it's just like we just you know, we watch the same things together.
Yeah. You have two kids, you said they're both
Yes.
old 30 now.
Joe just turned 33. Alina is 34.
34.
She's a year and a half older than him, almost exactly,
Oh,
18
okay.
months. So she's 34. Then next, for a while there, she'll be 2 years older than him. But
You said just really quickly, with Joseph, you said it affected him a lot. He has Asperger syndrome.
yes.
At the time he was diagnosed with it, was that why he was the way he was? And
Um, I don't know too, I can't tell you too much about the causes of Asperger syndrome. I think there's some genetic factor to it. When he was in preschool, the place where he went to preschool was right down the street from us. And I was working midnight shifts, so I would come home, and I would take Joseph to preschool in the morning, and then I'd come home and go to bed. And one morning, one of his teachers pulled me aside and said, Joe told me the other day, my daddy's going to the hospital. And for him, that could have meant that I was going to the hospital and I wasn't coming home for a couple of days because I had an infection or something like that. I told you I was in and out of the hospital. But the teacher said, well, is that a good thing? Because I was I'm going to work at the same place where I was, being taken away from them. And he said, yes, it's a good thing. She said he was dealing with that. I think more deeply than we realized. That really struck me. And I spent a lot of time with him when I could. He was, we always, for both of them, I tried to be as loving a father as I could. That was one of the things. Like I said, I spent a lot of time yelling at them right afterwards. But that
Mhm.
was kind of stuff that was like, well, you really need to, they're the victims. They didn't do anything.
Mm.
You know, this has been dealt to them, and it just, they have to stand on the sideline and watch somebody else go through this and not really understand what's happening. But like I said, they forgot. I don't know if they never, it
Yeah.
didn't sink into their
Blocked
permanent
out.
memory. Yeah, they don't. I don't know if they blocked it out or they just don't remember. I mean,
Hmm.
you and I mean, when we were little babies, we have spotty memories of what happened. I mean, I remember being in Taiwan. I mean, but I was only 2. I
Yeah.
remember, I remember vaguely there were things that I remember about that. I remember mom and dad before Jonathan was born.
Mhm.
But that was before I was 2. I remember these things. But then it's not like it's all together. It's not like real story memories. It's like just spotty things.
Yeah. Do you remember? Mom said that you spoke actually Chinese before you spoke English because of
Um,
my mom. Do you
I
remember
don't
that at all?
no, I don't
Oh.
remember any of that. Her one story is that, like, I guess when we went back to Taiwan, that she got a cab somewhere and she told the driver where she needed where what the destination was, and he couldn't understand her, and I told him where the destination was, and he was like, oh, okay. I don't remember that. I don't there
You are too. So how
yeah.
could you, right?
Oh, I don't, I mean, but I can remember, you know but remember, I grew up around you guys when I was that age. I grew up around you and John, and you know um I don't remember your other brother's name, the one that
Jia Tong. Yeah.
yeah. I grew up around you guys. You were my playmates at that time.
Mm.
So I probably learned to speak from you guys. That type of language acquisition doesn't become permanent until you're at least 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah. So
So for me, I didn't don't that stuff I didn't retain.
okay, so I wanted to go back to Joseph. He has Asperger syndrome. You guys knew that he had that. Was there things that as parents that you guys tried to help him with that?
What we did, we tried the traditional therapies and stuff. They tried to put him in a group at one of the places around here. That stuff didn't really seem to work with him. Medication didn't help at all. It was detrimental, we think. I think the best thing we did for him, or the best blessing that he ever received, was that we put him in private school. There's a good Christian school near our house. We pulled Lena out, and we pulled him out of public school, and we put them in there. And it was the best thing we could have ever done for both of them, I think.
Well, what's the difference, you think?
I think what he got was he got smaller classes.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't get a lot of he didn't he it wasn't factory learning. It wasn't like, you learn this, you learn, and if you don't learn it in their time frame, then well, too bad. Um he got um he got teachers that really cared about him.
Mm-hmm.
He got people, and the kids, I think, whether they were Christian or not, almost all the kids there were Christians, and so they really, they kind of were a little more understanding and a little more accepting, I think, of that than
Okay.
than they would have been in the public school.
Yeah. So did he ever have you ever had conversations with him about, not feeling or feeling out of it or not fitting in before? I mean, did he ever have that feeling that he shared with you the same as you had when you were younger?
Um, he had he had some issues in school. The ones we dealt with were more with the teachers than it was with his fellow students. One teacher was just horrible. She like she would and again, I said it was kind of like factory learning. She would have all the kids do something, or she would have them do a task where you do this, then you do this, and all the kids were doing things, one after another. Well, that's not very good for a kid who's probably was also one of the smartest kids in the class. I don't think I'm tooting. I mean, 'cause he's a really smart kid or a smart guy now, but he's like he would do everything, but he wouldn't be ready for the teacher because he was off on doing something else on his mind. He was off, thinking about something else. And so when she got to him, he wasn't prepared. And we ended up in a couple of parent-teacher conferences, and the teacher made a comment that maybe they need to think about Big Brother so he gets the attention at home that he needs. Like I wasn't even there. And at that time I was working in child psych. So I was not only was I there, but I was working with children.
Yeah.
So kind of like a huge insult. And so we went in where we talked to the principal. I mentioned that to him and he was like, well, but yeah, it was just like the teacher was making assumptions about Joseph that were totally unfounded and totally uninformed.
Yeah.
And just like really, and to that point, because she didn't seem to really care, snarky,
Yeah.
So,
I mean, teachers are such an important part of a kid's, growing up. I mean, I remember, I was just mentioning that I was going through some of my things and I come across stuff, and my yearbook was one of the ones that I had, and I looked through it, and one of the teachers that I remembered in high school, she was it was an acting teacher, or she did the acting code. I don't know. She was a teacher, and one of the things that she had always said to me, or she said to me, is that, Sharon, you're never going to be a good actress because you're too emotional. And that stuck with me for so long, in terms of, am I, or can I do it? Or, so like teachers like her, and there's a lot of teachers around that are not necessarily qualified in terms of dealing with certain things, but they're in the system, and it can affect a lot of things in a kid's life. I mean, I don't know.
yeah, well, one of the things that happened here, the kind of like an incident, is that Alina she went for a year to the same high school that Bernadette graduated from. And she said it was kind of telling to her that some of the teachers there were her classmates when she was there in high school. It's like they never wanted to leave, you know what I mean?
Oh,
Yeah, so they were there kind of like resolving their own issues instead of taking care of the kids.
interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's some of that. I think there's also, again, you pack a bunch of kids in a room. They all have varying different, I don't want to say levels of intelligence, but levels of capability, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, intelligence too.
They all have different skills. They all have different specialties. They're all brilliant in something, different things, and you're trying to teach them all the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do. And again, I think that was a blessing for our kids, because they went to a smaller school where they had small and the kids were able to, and actually, because it was so small that a lot of times the grades were combined, so the two of them would be in the same class together.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of the same classes together. And it was kind of funny because people were like, "Are you guys twins?" Because they're both a light-skinned blonde kid. They're and so they got there, and there was actually a set of boy and girl twins there at the time. And so people were like, "Are you twins too?" Yeah. Well, they look more alike than the ones that were real twins.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I wonder if the systems have gotten better with
No, they're worse.
yeah, it seems like that, right? Anyway, well, there's always hope about that. Let's be on the positive spectrum.
Yeah.
Before I go, then I wanted to ask you. You know, it comes to this part where I'm asking about your wow. So your wow meaning words of wisdom in terms of all the experiences that you've had and the things that you've gone through, whether good or bad, you know, sweet or painful. Is there anything that you would like to share with the audience in terms of your wow?
Um, I was gonna research it more, but I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Harvey. I know you were in the play Harvey.
Yeah.
I always go back to the words of Jimmy Stewart's words. He's a Western Pennsylvania, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Western Pennsylvania, yes. But anyway, going back to the words of Elwood P. Dowd,
Mm-hmm.
you can either be brilliant or you can be nice, and I prefer to be nice.
Oh.
And I think that's a paraphrasing, I think, but he was just like, when he was in there, he said, in my younger life, he said, was brilliant, and but but I didn't like myself that way, and I decided I preferred to be nice, so, and that's what I found. I mean, I'm again, with who I am and what I do at my job, everybody in the hospital knows me. I I get the same kind of greetings that I did when we lived in Hawaii, or when we lived in Elk Grove. Everybody knows me. Everybody, seems to like me. Everybody, I'd rather be nice and have that than be brilliant, be cold and be brilliant and be miserable.
Well, I think those are good words to live by. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Tom, for
Thank
chatting with me today. And thank you for showing up for this episode of the podcast. And we'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you so much.
Bye.